The city stretched before him, vibrant, relentless, a world pulsing with possibilities. Yet Elian stood at the edge of it all, feeling like an outsider. His dream had once seemed so clear, so tangible. He had a vision that could change everything, something that would elevate the world. But each rejection, each slammed door, had made that dream feel more like a cruel illusion. It wasn't the idea itself that they rejected. It was him. The sleek, polished world of investors saw only his skin, his background, and that alone had marked him as unworthy. He had crafted a proposal that could revolutionize industries, but none of them cared. In their eyes, he wasn't someone to take seriously. And with every no that filled his inbox, the doubt began to creep in. But Elian wasn't one to give up easily. Despite the crushing weight of rejection, the ember of his ambition remained lit. He would no longer seek approval from a system that never intended to include him. The rules of the game didn't apply to him. He could feel it in his bones. This was just the beginning. No longer would he chase what they told him was unattainable. He would carve out his own path, one that no one could close, no matter how many doors they slammed in his face. The hours seemed to stretch endlessly as Elian sat in front of the screen, his mind racing. His dreams, once bright and full of promise, now seemed like fragments of a distant memory. The world had dismissed him, but something inside him refused to stay silent. He could feel it, deep within his bones. There was more to his journey than waiting for validation that would never come. Each rejection had been a bitter reminder, but also a catalyst, urging him to see things differently. The corporate giants, the investors who had turned him away, they didn't define him. They couldn't see the bigger picture, the potential he held. And that, in its own twisted way, was the fuel he needed. The idea that had once seemed so fragile now burned with an intensity he hadn't known before. It wasn't just about success anymore. It was about proving that his vision, his passion, could no longer be ignored. The game had changed, and Elian understood it now. He didn't need their approval. He was going to build something that couldn't be denied, something that would force them to notice. And so, in the stillness of his room, amidst the darkness of doubt, a new fire ignited within him. Elian had finally awakened to the truth. He was the architect of his own destiny. Elian's resolve solidified with every passing day. The world had turned its back on him, but the harder they pushed, the stronger his conviction grew. Every rejection letter, every closed door, only stoked the fire inside him. He had been tested, bruised by the harsh realities of a world that didn't care. But now he understood something vital. It wasn't about waiting for an invitation anymore. It was about creating his own place. The energy he once spent chasing approval had now turned inward, focused on the one thing that had always belonged to him, his vision. Late nights became routine, and early mornings blurred together as Elian poured himself into his work. His idea, once fragile and untested, began to take shape, evolving into something tangible, something that could no longer be ignored. The idea had grown into an empire of possibilities, all rising from the ashes of rejection. The world had told him no. But that no was the beginning of something more powerful than he had ever imagined. Every hour spent working, every small victory, built momentum. It wasn't just about the product anymore. It was about proving to himself that his dreams were not dictated by others' perceptions. He was creating something that had never been seen before. And the journey had just begun. Elian's hands shook as he hit the final key. The glow of the screen illuminated his face, reflecting the culmination of months of relentless work. What once seemed impossible was now tangible. The prototype of his product had transformed from abstract concepts into a living, breathing creation. Every line of code, every design element, every decision had been built with an unyielding determination to prove the world wrong. The weight of the journey hit him all at once. There had been nights when he questioned himself, moments when the doubt was louder than the fire. But in the silence of his room, with only the hum of the computer as a witness, he realized just how far he had come. He was no longer the young man begging for a chance. He was the creator of his own future. The world outside remained indifferent, unaware of the storm that was quietly brewing. The rejection, the struggle, the sleepless nights, they had all led to this moment. Elian had crafted something that no one had asked for but everyone would need. And in that quiet stillness, there was a peace that only those who dared to build their own empire could understand. This wasn't just a product. It was his declaration. The world had overlooked him, but it would soon have no choice but to pay attention. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city. Elian stood at the window, watching the world continue its relentless motion, unaware of the storm quietly building in the depths of his mind. The world had been indifferent to him for so long, but now, in the quiet of his solitude, he could feel the winds shifting. It wasn't just about creating something remarkable anymore. It was about the risk, taking the leap. Every step he had taken up until now had led to this precipice. The moment when one must decide whether to stay in the safety of the known or step into the uncertain. Elian knew what was at stake. He had seen the sharp edges of rejection, tasted the bitterness of failure. But it had all been worth it. The fire that had sparked in him had only grown stronger, burning away every trace of doubt. In this moment, he felt the weight of what was to come, the decision to go public, to place his creation into the hands of the world. It was a gamble, but Elian had no choice. He couldn't retreat now, not after all the sacrifices, the hours, the dreams that had led him here. He took a deep breath and pressed send. The world would soon know his name. The response was immediate, yet Elian remained motionless, staring at the screen before him. The emails, the messages, his creation was suddenly alive in the world. But amidst the rush of excitement, something else lingered beneath the surface. The weight of his decision had already begun to settle in his chest. He had taken a chance, thrown his creation into the hands of people who had once rejected him. Now, it was out there. The universe had been given a taste of his vision, and it was only a matter of time before everything would change. What had once been a quiet spark of an idea had now erupted into something larger, more powerful than he had ever imagined. His creation was beginning to spread like wildfire. Each new email, each new message, was a testament to the possibility that had always been within him. The dream was no longer just his. It had taken root in others' lives, and it was growing. The world had failed to see the depth of what he was capable of. But now, they were beginning to understand. Elian wasn't merely chasing approval anymore. He was building something that demanded attention, something that could no longer be ignored. In the quiet moments, Elian could feel it. His empire was taking form. Days passed in a blur, the kind that only comes when something extraordinary begins to take shape. Elian could feel it. His creation was no longer a mere product. It was evolving into something greater, something that carried the weight of his journey. The responses kept pouring in, not just from curious onlookers, but from those who saw what he saw. They recognized the potential, the brilliance behind what he had built. What once seemed like a dream in the shadows now had a place in the light. But the success didn't come without its pressure. The weight of expectations began to build. Every new opportunity, every new inquiry, was a reminder that the path he had chosen was not one of comfort. It was one of constant evolution, constant growth. He had stepped into a world that would not wait for him to catch up. He had to run now, faster than ever before. As the days passed, Elian found himself not only managing his creation, but also learning how to navigate a world he had once been shut out of. The skills he had honed over years of rejection now guided him as he forged ahead. He had been underestimated, but now the world had no choice but to notice. The dream was real, and Elian was only just beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had started. The days of isolation, the nights spent alone with nothing but his thoughts and ambition, had led to this. Elian stood at the edge of what seemed like an entirely new world, but even now he couldn't quite believe it. Recognition was a slow and quiet thing, like a seed breaking through the surface of the earth. But once it took root, there was no stopping it. The calls came, the emails, the offers. It was the kind of attention Elian had once only dreamed of. He had built something real, something that was now standing on its own. It wasn't the rush of fame or the excitement of the spotlight that filled him with pride. It was the knowledge that the world was finally seeing the truth he had always known. He was capable. The rejection he had once felt so deeply now seemed distant. It was as if those rejections had served as the perfect fuel for his rise. Every no had been a stepping stone, pushing him further toward something greater. What had once been a lone voice in the crowd now stood as a beacon, a symbol of resilience and vision. The journey was far from over, but Elian had reached a milestone. And though there was much more to be done in this moment, he allowed himself to feel something rare, pride in what he had built and the life he had forged from nothing. The world had begun to notice. It was no longer just the whispers of possibility. Elian's empire had caught the attention of those who once thought him invisible. The letters, the invitations to conferences, the requests for partnerships, they all felt surreal, like they belonged to someone else. Yet, in the depths of his quiet moments, he understood the significance of it all. This was more than success. This was validation. But as the recognition grew, so did the pressure. It wasn't the kind of pressure that came from external sources. It was the kind that came from within. Elian knew that to sustain what he had built, to take it to the next level, he would have to push harder, think deeper, and risk more than ever before. The higher he rose, the steeper the climb became. But there was no turning back. Every day he found himself walking the tightrope of ambition and fear. The weight of his dreams now felt heavier than ever, but with it came the clarity of purpose. Elian no longer questioned whether he was capable. He knew that his journey, filled with both sacrifices and triumphs, had equipped him for this very moment. The empire he had built was just beginning to take shape, and as the world looked on, Elian was ready for the next chapter of his story. The night was still, and the city outside was alive with its usual hum. Yet inside Elian's mind, there was nothing but quiet determination. The empire he had built was solid, but the question that lingered in his thoughts was not about the success. It was about what came next. He had reached a point where his creation could no longer be contained by the walls of his vision. The world was evolving, and Elian knew that to continue growing, he would need to adapt. What had once been a singular dream was now a living entity. Every decision, every move carried weight, and with that weight came an undeniable sense of responsibility. The empire was no longer just his. It had become a part of something larger, something global. But the cost of growth was not always visible at first. The further he pushed, the more he realized how much he had to risk. The decisions that lay ahead were crucial. Elian could no longer afford to be a passive player. He had become an integral part of a vast network, and now he had to determine the direction it would go. Every choice mattered, and the stakes were higher than ever. The horizon seemed both distant and close, and Elian understood that this was the moment that would define everything that followed. The weight of ambition began to settle on Elian's shoulders with a quiet force. What had once felt like an unstoppable force of nature now seemed like a careful dance, balancing dreams with realities. The world he had built from the ground up was no longer just his. Its pulse was shared with a growing number of people who had come to rely on it. The moment he had feared had arrived, maintaining the momentum. It wasn't the external competition that weighed on him, but the challenge of staying true to his core while expanding further into new territories. The ever-present fear of losing himself in the process grew louder. Elian had always understood the price of success, but now it had become more tangible. There was no going back. Every choice he made had consequences. He was now a leader, a beacon for those who believed in him. Yet even amidst the growing empire, he could feel the subtle tug of doubt. Could he keep up? Could he still innovate, still move forward at the pace he had set? The fire inside him still burned, but now it was accompanied by the knowledge that true growth required not just vision, but discipline and an understanding of the cost. Elian had learned to rise above, but now he had to learn to stay there. As Elian stood in front of the window, watching the city unfold beneath him, he felt a sense of calm wash over him, an unusual stillness in the midst of his bustling empire. It was the kind of quiet that only came after a long journey, the moment when you pause to assess how far you've truly come. The dream he had once held so fiercely in his hands had expanded beyond anything he had ever imagined. What started as a seed of hope had now blossomed into a thriving business that reached corners of the world he had never dreamed of. The recognition, the success, the respect, it was all there. But in this moment of reflection, Elian found himself questioning something deeper. What had he truly gained? The world had changed around him, but in the stillness of his mind, Elian couldn't help but wonder if the very thing he had built might someday become the thing that would challenge him the most. Success had its price, and he could feel the weight of it pressing on his chest. But amidst the uncertainty, one thing remained clear. The empire he had created was more than just a business. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the power of perseverance, and to the ability to rise above every obstacle. He had created something truly remarkable. Elian sat in his office, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city below. The empire he had built from the ground up was now a colossal entity, but with it came an unexpected burden. The weight of his success was not something he had anticipated when he started this journey. At first, all he saw was the dream, the vision of what could be, the endless possibilities. Now those dreams had materialized into something far more complex. The responsibility had grown heavier with each passing day. The pressure to maintain this empire, to keep it growing, was relentless. He had always been driven by ambition, but now it was as if his every move was scrutinized, The world had watched him rise, and now they waited for him to fall. But Elian wasn't afraid. Despite the pressure, he knew that the path he had walked was one forged by his own hands. No one had given him a shortcut, and no one could take away what he had built. There was a certain pride in that, a quiet confidence that came from knowing his strength had been tested, and he had come through stronger each time. Even so, the question remained, how much more could he carry before it all became too much? The day felt different. There was an unusual stillness in the air, as if the universe was holding its breath. Elian had learned to embrace moments like these, moments that demanded reflection. His empire was thriving, but the deeper he moved into uncharted territory, the more he realized how little control he had over the forces surrounding him. Success had brought him to heights he never imagined, but with it came a sense of uncertainty. He had crossed into a realm where the stakes were high and the risks were greater. The thrill of building something from nothing had given way to a quiet fear of losing it all. Yet, amidst that fear, Elian found clarity. The weight of success had forced him to face his greatest challenge yet. Not the empire he had built, but the person he had become. The man who had started this journey had been driven by dreams, but now he was driven by something deeper, purpose. And in that purpose, Elian saw the path forward. It wasn't just about growing the empire or expanding its reach. It was about staying grounded, about ensuring that the core values that had guided him from the beginning remained intact. In the silence, Elian understood one thing. It wasn't the destination that mattered. It was the journey and how you chose to walk it. Elian stood at the edge of everything he had built, the world stretching before him in endless possibilities. The empire he had forged from the ground up had become an indomitable force. But as time passed, it became increasingly clear that the next step in his journey was not a matter of expanding further. It was about redefining what success meant. He had reached a point where the numbers, the accolades, the recognition no longer held the same weight. There was something more profound pulling him forward now, a deeper sense of purpose. The world had changed around him, and so had he. The hunger that had once driven him was now tempered by a quiet understanding of the costs of greatness. The path ahead was not paved with gold, nor was it lined with guarantees. It was a raw, uncertain road where every step forward was an act of trust. Trust in himself, trust in those he had chosen to walk beside him, and most of all, trust in the journey itself. Elian's eyes scanned the horizon once more, but this time there was no rush, no urgency. He had learned that the most powerful thing in life wasn't the race to the top. It was the wisdom gained along the way. He was ready, not for what came next, but for what he had become. Elian's empire had grown beyond what he had ever imagined, and yet, in the quiet moments between meetings and decisions, there was an undeniable emptiness that lingered. The walls of success, while impressive, seemed to echo with a silence that his achievements could not fill. The world saw the man who had conquered the business realm, but only he knew the truth behind the triumph. The truth that even the grandest victories came with their own cost. He had always believed that reaching the peak would bring fulfillment, but the summit had brought him something unexpected: clarity. In the stillness of his reflection, Elian realized that the journey was never about the destination. It was about understanding the lessons hidden within each struggle, the growth that occurred in the face of adversity, and the people who stood by him along the way. There was beauty in the quiet victory, in knowing that his empire was not just built on profits, but on resilience, on choices that reflected his values, and on a vision that extended beyond the material. The weight of it all no longer felt like a burden, but a testament to the strength within. Elian had learned that true success wasn't in the applause. It was in the peace that came from within, in the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done it on his terms. The days had started to blur together, each one falling into the next with little distinction. Yet, beneath the surface, Elian felt a subtle shift in his perspective. The empire he had built was no longer just a symbol of power. It had become a mirror, reflecting back everything he had ever feared. Each decision, each move he made carried weight, and for the first time, Elian was aware of the true consequences of his actions. There was no longer a simple road ahead, no clear path that would lead him to the future he envisioned. Instead, life had become a series of intersections, each one demanding a choice. The pressure mounted with every passing moment, the burden of leading an empire, of shaping the lives of those who depended on him. Yet, in the midst of it all, Elian found a quiet resolve. He realized that the choices he made, no matter how difficult, were his to own. The power wasn't in avoiding tough decisions. It was in embracing them, accepting their consequences, and moving forward with unwavering conviction. The weight of the choices wasn't a burden, but a privilege. It meant that he had the power to shape not just his own future, but the futures of others. And with that realization, Elian understood that true leadership wasn't just about commanding empires. It was about owning the responsibility that came with it. As Elian walked through the quiet halls of his empire, the weight of the world seemed to press down on his shoulders. The empire was thriving, but there was something beneath the surface, something shifting. The bright lights of success had begun to dull, and in their place was an unspoken tension, a feeling that something important was yet to come. The hum of busy meetings, the click of keys, and the bustling voices had become a distant echo. What had once been a source of pride now felt like a steady rhythm, reliable, but predictable. Elian could no longer ignore the feeling that he had reached a crossroads. But even in this moment of uncertainty, there was a strange sense of peace. It was the kind of calm that comes just before a storm, where clarity finally rises out of the fog. Elian had fought hard to reach this point, but he had not yet won the battle. The real challenge, he realized, was not in what he had already built, but in what was yet to be defined. The next steps seemed unclear, yet Elian knew one thing. The time for reflection was over. It was time to decide who he wanted to be, not just as a leader, but as a man. In this moment, everything was at stake. The morning sun poured through the windows of Elian's office, casting long shadows on the polished floor. The world outside continued its relentless pace, but inside, time seemed to stretch, every second feeling both fleeting and eternal. Elian sat alone, his thoughts heavy with the weight of all that had happened, and all that had yet to come. The choices before him were no longer just business decisions. They were life-altering moments, each one carrying its own consequences. It was as if the universe itself had paused, waiting for him to act. His fingers traced the surface of his desk absent-mindedly, a small movement that mirrored the uncertainty swirling in his chest. This was the point of no return. There could be no going back, no undoing what had been done. Every victory, every defeat, every moment of doubt had led him here, to this moment of decision. He could feel the pulse of the empire beating in his chest, steady and strong. But there was a new force now, an inner drive, a deeper calling. It wasn't just about growth or success anymore. It was about legacy. It was about the mark he would leave on the world, and whether that mark would be one of true impact or just another fleeting triumph. The weight of the future pressed on him, but in it, he found his clarity. It was time to step forward. The quiet hum of Elion's empire surrounded him, but his mind was far away, lost in the weight of his thoughts. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, seemed to be leading him to a place he couldn't quite grasp. The vision he once held, clear and bright, had started to blur at the edges, the uncertainty of the future creeping in. He stood by the window, staring out at the sprawling city below. The sun was setting, casting the world in shades of gold and crimson, a fleeting beauty that seemed to mock the permanence he sought. In that moment, Elion understood that there was no true destination, only the journey. The future was not a place to arrive at. It was something to shape, moment by moment, decision by decision. As the last rays of light dipped below the horizon, Elion took a deep breath. He wasn't the same person who had walked into this empire years ago. The path ahead would be fraught with challenges, with risks, and with sacrifices, but it would also be filled with potential. He had the power to choose, to carve out a future that would echo long after he was gone. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was his to take. The empire hummed with its usual rhythm, but Elion felt a growing restlessness in the air. It wasn't the weight of deadlines or the pressure of success. It was something deeper, something intangible. The once firm and predictable world he had built now felt fragile, as if every brick could crumble with a single misplaced step. Yet, in this stillness, Elion found a strange sense of clarity. The world was always in motion, and so was he. The days of fighting against the current were behind him. It was time to move with it, to allow the world to reshape itself around him, while he silently led it toward a future yet unseen. He walked through the halls of his empire. The familiar sights no longer comforted him the way they once did. Instead, they felt like reminders of the sacrifices, the long nights, the doubts that had plagued him. But with each step, he grew stronger. With each moment of uncertainty, he found more resolve. In that quiet revolution, Elion understood that power wasn't always loud. It didn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes, true strength lay in the subtle shift of the tides, in the moments where nothing seemed to change, but everything was transformed. And in that understanding, he found peace. Elion sat in his office, staring at the untouched reports that lay before him. The empire he had built was thriving, yet a nagging emptiness lingered beneath the surface. For all the success, there was something intangible missing, a sense of purpose beyond the numbers and profits. He had achieved the impossible, but had he found what truly mattered? Outside the window, the city buzzed with life, a million stories unfolding in the streets below. Yet, within the walls of his empire, the silence was deafening. It was the quiet hum of power, of influence, but also of isolation. In those moments, Elion wondered if anyone could ever truly understand the weight of what he carried. His empire had brought him admiration, but also enemies, some open, others hidden in the shadows. The challenges ahead would be different, subtler, yet no less daunting. It was not the loud battles that would define him, but the quiet decisions, the moments when he had to choose between what was easy and what was right. He rose from his chair and looked out over the city once more. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with unseen hurdles, But Elian knew one thing. He was ready. Not all battles were fought with force. Some were won in the quiet moments when everything seemed still, and yet everything changed. Elian walked through the heart of the city, the hustle and bustle of everyday life enveloping him. The noise was comforting in its own way, a reminder of the world beyond his empire, a world filled with people chasing dreams, struggling, and hoping for something better. It was a world that still felt distant, despite his success. As he moved through the crowded streets, Elian's mind wandered to the future. He had built an empire, yes. But what was its purpose? Was it merely to thrive, to expand, to conquer? Or was there a greater mission, a deeper meaning that had yet to be revealed? The uncertainty lingered. But Elian knew one thing. He couldn't remain in the shadows of his past triumphs. The future awaited, but it wouldn't come to him. He had to chase it, to reach for it even when it seemed out of grasp. There was no roadmap, no blueprint for the kind of future he envisioned. It would require more than just strategy. It would demand courage, resilience, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. With each step, Elian felt the weight of what was to come. The world was changing, and he was no longer a passive observer. He was shaping the future with every decision, every choice. And in that realization, he found a quiet determination that filled him with a sense of purpose he had never known before. The days blurred into one another for Elian. Each morning brought a new challenge, each night a brief moment of respite before the cycle began again. Yet amid the relentless pace of his empire's growth, something inside him shifted. The feeling of accomplishment was no longer enough. It was as if his success had become a heavy mantle that weighed him down. In the quiet of his office, as he watched the sunset bleed across the skyline, Elian realized that the empire was more than just a testament to his ambition. It was a reflection of his choices, of everything he had sacrificed. The long hours, the personal relationships left behind, the parts of himself he had to bury, all of it was written into the very fabric of what he had built. But with that realization came a new understanding. Success, he knew, could be a double-edged sword. It could elevate you to unimaginable heights, but it could also isolate you in ways you never anticipated. As the city below him thrived, Elian couldn't help but wonder if the price of his triumphs had been too steep. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft hum of his phone, but for the first time, Elian wasn't sure if he wanted to answer. The future lay ahead, but the past still clung to him, whispering questions he wasn't yet ready to face. The weight of Elian's empire seemed to multiply with every passing day. What had once been a dream now felt like a world he had created and couldn't escape from. As the seasons changed, so did his outlook. What he had worked so tirelessly for, what he had believed would fill the empty spaces inside him, now left him feeling hollow. His empire sprawled before him like an endless horizon, yet the victory he had longed for seemed distant, unreachable. The victory had never been the summit, he realized. The true challenge was the journey, the constant balancing act between ambition and satisfaction. The months of tireless work, the sleepless nights, the calls to distant lands. All of it had brought him to a place of success he could no longer recognize. The line between progress and burnout blurred. His heart, once filled with fiery passion, now felt heavy, burdened by the weight of his own success. Elian stood in front of the city's skyline one evening, the vibrant glow of neon lights reflecting the progress he had made. But deep inside, there was a quiet ache. The world had changed around him, but had he? The empire was thriving, but Elian knew he had yet to confront the questions that still echoed inside him. Questions he was not ready to face.